It was a crisp Wednesday afternoon in the city of Brookside, a place known for its vibrant mix of cultures and diverse population. Yet beneath the surface, tensions sometimes lingered. In the heart of the city, where the bustling streets and towering office buildings met the quiet residential neighborhoods. Lieutenant Alexis Carter, a woman of determination and strength, found herself leaving a high-level meeting at the Brookside Police Department headquarters. The meeting had gone smoothly, and Alexis had contributed her usual sharp insights, leaving everyone in the room with a sense of respect and admiration. As one of the most respected officers in the department, Alexis had earned her place, not only because of her tactical prowess and knowledge, but because of the heart and compassion she showed for the community. It had been a long day, from early morning briefings to high-stakes meetings with city officials. Alexis was used to the fast-paced, high-pressure environment of law enforcement. Yet, despite the grind, she remained grounded, always poised, always prepared. Her reputation had been built on her consistency, her integrity, and her deep connection with the people she served. As a black woman in a traditionally male-dominated profession, she had fought hard to break barriers and overcome the challenges that came with being one of the few people of color in positions of authority in law enforcement. As she drove her unmarked police vehicle, the familiar rhythm of the city outside her window provided a small comfort. But today, something felt different. There was a tension in the air, something unspoken, yet palpable. Perhaps it was the fatigue from the meeting, or the anticipation of the long list of cases she had yet to address. Whatever it was, Alexis couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing in the city, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She decided to take a detour before heading back to the station. Alexis turned her car into the parking lot of a small, unassuming store nestled in one of the city's quieter neighborhoods. This was a place she had visited often, a spot where she could take a brief respite from the chaos of the city. The local market, owned by Mr. Johnson, an elderly black man with a warm smile and a sharp sense of humor, was her sanctuary. She had known Mr. Johnson for years, having come to his store for quick snacks and coffee during her shifts. Over the years, their conversations had become a small, reliable constant in her routine. They talk about everything from local politics to the state of the world, always with a dose of humor and a touch of honesty that was hard to come by in a job like hers. Pulling into the parking lot, Alexis noticed the soft hum of the city as it wound down for the evening. It wasn't late, but the streets were already becoming quieter. She stepped out of her car, stretching as she took in the fresh air, her muscles sore from sitting in meetings all day. With her uniform pressed and her cap slightly askew from the wind, she walked into the local market, a small bell ringing above the door as she entered. Inside, the store was familiar and comforting. The shelves were stocked with everyday necessities: chips, bread, canned goods, and the occasional bouquet of flowers. The lighting was soft, casting a warm glow across the aisles. But today, something felt different. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a tension that she couldn't quite explain. Alexis smiled at Mr. Johnson, who was standing behind the counter, but there was something in his expression that gave her pause. "Hey there, Mr. Johnson," Alexis greeted, her voice steady as she picked up a bottle of water from the shelf. "How's your day been?" Mr. Johnson looked up at her, offering a small smile, though his eyes were clouded with concern. "Oh, just the usual," he said, his voice low. "But I don't know. There's something going on in the air today. I can feel it." "Alexis, something's not right." Alexis raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his tone. "What do you mean? Is something happening in the neighborhood?" "I don't know, but I've had a strange feeling all day," he said, leaning in closer to her, his voice dropping even lower. "There's been talk, whispers about some things going on behind the scenes. People are tense, not just in this neighborhood, but the whole city. You can feel it when you're out there. Things are shifting." Alexis paused, her hand still resting on the bottle of water. She knew Mr. Johnson well enough to know when he was serious. His intuition was usually spot on. She had learned to trust his instincts over the years. But what could it mean? Brookside had always been a city of contrasts. rich with diversity, but still struggling with its own issues of inequality and tension. She had always worked hard to address these issues, to serve her community with fairness and justice. But was something more sinister brewing? Before Alexis could respond, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Hey, Alexis, how's it going?" A young man in his mid-20s entered the store, wearing a hoodie and a pair of worn-out jeans. It was Derek, one of the young residents from the neighborhood who had grown up in the area and known Alexis since she had started working in the community. Derek had always been respectful to Alexis, and though he had a tough exterior, she had come to learn that he was just trying to make a living and stay out of trouble. Derek nodded at her, but there was something in his eyes today that was different. He was looking over his shoulder, almost nervously, before he approached the counter. "Just came by for a snack," he said quickly, trying to cover up the tension that Alexis could sense. "Everything all right, Derek?" Alexis asked, her voice softening with concern. Derek hesitated for a moment, glancing at Mr. Johnson. Yeah, everything's fine. Just, things out there are a little crazy lately." Mr. Johnson gave a small grunt of agreement, then went back to organizing a stack of canned goods behind the counter. "See, Alexis, it's not just me feeling it. Something's going on, and I don't know if it's good or bad yet." Alexis stood still, trying to process everything she had heard. There was definitely something in the air, something she couldn't ignore, as much as she tried to dismiss it. The unease settled deep in her chest. She had been in law enforcement long enough to recognize the signs. People weren't just talking about the usual rumors and gossip. This felt different, as if something was about to explode. "All right," Alexis said, shaking off the feeling that had settled into her gut. "I'll take the water and a granola bar, but I'll be back later to check in. Keep your heads up, both of you. Stay safe." Mr. Johnson nodded, but Derek didn't seem convinced. He gave her a hesitant look before grabbing his snack and leaving the store without saying another word. Alexis paid for her items and stepped back outside into the streets of Brookside. The city was quieter now, but the feeling of tension remained. There was something coming. She could feel it, and it wasn't something she could ignore. She slid into her unmarked police vehicle, staring out the window as she started the engine. Whatever was happening, Alexis knew it was only the beginning. She had to stay alert. The peace she had worked so hard to build in Brookside could be shattered in an instant, and she was the one who would have to stand at the front lines. But as she drove through the streets, she couldn't shake the feeling that this time, it wouldn't be business as usual. There were bigger forces at play, and it was up to her to uncover the truth before it was too late. Alexis pulled her unmarked police vehicle to a stop outside a small, local convenience store she had frequented for years. The store, Patel's Market, wasn't anything special, but it was a place of comfort for Alexis, offering a brief respite from the demands of her high-stress job. The elderly owner, Mr. Patel, always greeted her with a warm smile, and they often shared stories about their lives and the neighborhood. Today, however, something felt different. As Alexis entered, she immediately sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The usual hum of the store was replaced by an unsettling quiet, and Mr. Patel, usually cheerful, appeared tense behind the counter. Alexis greeted him with her usual smile, but his response was short and distracted. "Good afternoon, Mr. Patel," she said, picking up a bottle of water and a granola bar from the shelf. "Afternoon, Lieutenant," he replied, not looking her in the eye. His hands were shaky as he rang up her items. A sharp instinct flared within Alexis, the feeling of something amiss growing stronger. She paid for the items quickly, giving Mr. Patel a curious glance. But before she could ask if everything was all right, a voice interrupted from the back of the store. "Hey, you've got to leave her alone." It was a young man, standing near the back of the store, facing a group of rowdy teenagers who were causing trouble. Alexis's hand instinctively moved to her side, where her service weapon was holstered. The tension in the room was building, and she could feel it escalating fast. The silence that followed Alexis's words seemed to stretch longer than it should have. The group of teenagers, once so full of defiance, had shifted into a tense stillness, unsure of what to do next. Alexis could see the leader, the tall boy with the snapback hat, glance nervously at the others. He tried to keep up the appearance of bravado, but it was clear that something had changed. Alexis knew this wasn't the first time she had dealt with this type of situation. Young people often tested boundaries, but the violence of the incident in the alley still lingered in her thoughts. The shift in her tone had been intentional. She wasn't going to let this get out of hand. She stood her ground, her posture commanding and confident. "Listen," Alexis said, her voice cool but firm. "I'm not here to argue. What I'm here for is to make sure everyone stays safe and that no one gets hurt. Not Mr. Patel. Not you. Not anyone in this store." The leader hesitated again, his eyes darting to the others. He could see the look in Alexis's eyes, a look that told him she wasn't going to back down. No matter how tough he tried to act, he had to know when to cut his losses. There were plenty of other places they could go to cause trouble, but Alexis had made it clear that this wasn't going to be one of them. "All right," he muttered, his bravado faltering. "We're leaving, but you better watch your back. Officer." He turned on his heel, and the rest of the group followed suit, walking out the door with the same forced coolness they had walked in with. But Alexis could see their shoulders were slumped, and their steps were hurried. They were intimidated, whether by her presence or by the sudden realization that they'd pushed too far. She couldn't tell, but it didn't matter. As they left, Alexis took a deep breath and walked over to Mr. Patel, who had been watching the entire exchange with a quiet intensity. "Mr. Patel," Alexis said gently, "are you sure you're all right?" Mr. Patel nodded slowly, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "I am, Lieutenant. Thank you." He paused for a moment, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and lingering fear. I didn't know what to do. It's been getting worse these last few weeks. They always come in, talk big, then walk out. But tonight, I thought they were going to." Alexis raised a hand, cutting him off softly. "It's all right. You don't have to explain. I understand. People like you, people who put their heart and soul into their businesses, don't deserve to be treated like that." He smiled faintly, a weary but appreciative smile. "Thank you again, Lieutenant. You are always here when we need you. I don't know what I would do without you." There was a moment of silence between them, a quiet acknowledgement of their shared understanding. Alexis had made a promise to herself when she first joined the force that she would stand up for the little guy, the people who needed protection, the people who often felt invisible. Just like Mr. Patel, she had seen too much to let anyone get away with harming those who couldn't fight back. But there was more to it than just protecting people. For Alexis, it was about restoring trust, rebuilding the broken bridges between the community and the police. Too many times, she had seen the police viewed with suspicion, the community divided. She knew her work was far from over. But moments like these, small victories like this one, kept her going. She stood with Mr. Patel for a moment, then turned back to the door. "I'll be around for the rest of the night," Alexis said. "If anything happens, don't hesitate to call." "Of course, Lino," Mr. Patel replied, his voice steady. "I'll be all right now, thanks to you." Alexis gave him a reassuring smile and walked out the door. The cool evening air hit her face as she stepped back onto the street, the city lights shining down on the busy streets of Rivertown. The hustle and bustle of the city never seemed to stop, but Alexis had long learned to find peace in the noise, to focus on the things that mattered. She got into her unmarked car and started the engine, her mind still lingering on the encounter. As she drove, her thoughts began to wander, but she quickly brought them back to the present. She needed to keep her head in the game. There was always something else to do, something else that needed her attention. It wasn't just about one small victory, it was about building momentum, one step at a time. Her phone buzzed, breaking her from her thoughts. It was a message from her partner. "Jake, we got a situation on 5th and Oak. Possible gang-related activity. Could use your backup." Alexis let out a deep sigh, but didn't hesitate. She flicked on her sirens and pulled out into traffic. This was what she did. This was her life now, dealing with the messes that other people had made. Fighting for justice, even when it seemed like the odds were against her. As she drove toward the scene, she thought back to Mr. Patel's store and the sense of accomplishment she had felt when those kids left. It was a rare moment of clarity in an otherwise chaotic life. But she wasn't naive. The battle for peace, for safety, was ongoing, and she knew that she couldn't rest until things were better. Not just for the people like Mr. Patel, but for the entire community, for every family in Rivertown that deserved to feel safe. No matter their background, the sirens howled as she sped through the streets, the sound blending into the rhythm of the city. Alexis felt the weight of her responsibility, but she also felt something else: resolve. She wasn't going to stop. She couldn't. When she arrived at the scene, the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the night. A crowd had already gathered, murmuring in hushed tones, but the presence of her unmarked car, her figure stepping out in full uniform, immediately commanded their attention. Alexis walked toward the officers already at the scene, her mind sharp, focused, ready for whatever came next. This was the life she had chosen, the fight she had joined. It wasn't about winning every battle. It was about fighting, every single day, for the ones who couldn't fight for themselves. And for Alexis, that was enough.